The Tudor Era: Love, Betrayal, and Bloody History. The Tudor Era is one of the most fascinating and dangerous chapters in human history. It was a time when love could become a weapon, marriage could become a battlefield, and a single mistake could cost a person their life. Behind the golden image of royal courts, grand castles, and powerful monarchs was a world filled with ambition, betrayal, religious conflict, secret alliances, and rivers of blood. The story of the Tudor dynasty begins with a nation searching for stability after years of chaos. England had been torn apart by decades of civil war known as the Wars of the Roses. Two powerful houses, Lancaster and York, fought for the English throne. Noble families destroyed each other, kings were overthrown, and loyalty changed as quickly as the wind. Out of this destruction came a man who would change England forever, Henry Tudor. Henry Tudor was not the strongest claimant to the throne. He was not the richest, nor did he have the largest army. But he had something more powerful: patience, strategy, and a dream of becoming king. In 1485, Henry Tudor faced King Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth Field. The battle would decide the future of England. Richard III was a warrior king, experienced and respected by many soldiers. But betrayal was already growing around him. When some of Richard's allies abandoned him during the fight, his chances collapsed. Richard III was killed, and Henry Tudor became King Henry VII. A new era had begun. The Tudor dynasty promised peace after years of bloodshed. But the irony was that the Tudor age itself would become one of the bloodiest periods in English history. Henry VII understood one thing clearly: power was fragile. A king could lose everything if he trusted the wrong people. So he worked carefully to strengthen his position. To unite enemies, Henry married Elizabeth of York, the daughter of the Yorkist king, Edward IV. Their marriage was not just a love story. It was a political move designed to end the conflict between Lancaster and York. The red rose and the white rose were joined together. The Tudor rose became a symbol of a new England. But beneath the symbols and celebrations, the royal family remained a place where love and politics were impossible to separate. Henry VII and Elizabeth of York had several children, including a boy who would become one of the most famous and controversial rulers in history, Henry VIII. The young prince grew up surrounded by wealth, education, music, and power. Unlike many future kings, he was not originally expected to rule. His older brother Arthur was supposed to become king. Arthur married Catherine of Aragon, a Spanish princess, and daughter of the powerful rulers Ferdinand and Isabella. The marriage was meant to create a strong alliance between England and Spain. But fate changed everything. Arthur died suddenly at a young age. The future of England changed overnight. The younger brother, Henry, became the new heir. The young Henry VIII was described as intelligent, charming, athletic, and impressive. He loved music, sports, and intellectual debates. Many people believed he would become an ideal king. But history would remember him differently. When Henry VIII became king in 1509, England entered a new age of ambition and danger. At first, Henry appeared to be a successful monarch. He was respected across Europe. He challenged foreign powers and wanted England to become stronger. His marriage to Catherine of Aragon continued, and for many years they seemed like a powerful royal couple. But the greatest crisis of Henry's life began with one question: who would inherit the throne? Henry wanted a male heir. Catherine gave birth to several children, but most died young. Only one child survived Mary. Henry became increasingly worried. A female heir was considered risky in a world dominated by male rulers and constant political conflict. Then another woman entered the story, Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn was intelligent, ambitious, and different from other women at court. She was not simply someone who wanted to become a queen. She understood power. Henry became obsessed with her. But Anne refused to become just another royal mistress. She demanded something extraordinary. She wanted to become queen. This desire would transform England forever. Henry wanted to end his marriage with Catherine of Aragon. But divorce was not simple. The Catholic Church controlled marriage laws, and the Pope refused to allow Henry to separate from Catherine. Henry faced a choice: accept the Church's decision or change the entire religious structure of England. He chose revolution. Henry broke away from the authority of the Pope and created the Church of England, placing himself as its supreme leader. It was one of the most dramatic political and religious changes in European history. A love story had become a national crisis. But Henry's new power came with a terrible cost. Those who opposed him were accused of treason. Silence became a survival strategy. Even powerful figures could fall. The Tudor world was a place where a person could rise from nothing and stand beside the throne, but could also fall from glory to execution in a single day. The marriage of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn began with passion and hope. But Tudor love stories rarely ended happily. The woman Henry had destroyed a kingdom for would eventually face the same danger as everyone else around him. Because in the Tudor court, love was never stronger than power. The rise of Anne Boleyn was unlike anything England had ever seen. She was not born a queen. She came from a noble family, but she was not the most powerful woman at court. Her greatest weapons were her intelligence, confidence, and ability to understand the mind of King Henry VIII. Henry was fascinated by her. For years he had been used to getting what he wanted. Kings were expected to command, and people were expected to obey. But Anne was different. She did not immediately surrender to his wishes. She made him chase her. To Henry, this made her even more desirable. The king, who had once been praised as a perfect Renaissance ruler, became consumed by the idea of making Anne his wife. But the path to their marriage changed England forever. Henry's decision to separate from Catherine of Aragon created a massive crisis. Catherine had been queen for decades. Many people respected her, and she refused to accept that her marriage could simply be erased. She believed she was Henry's true wife. She believed her daughter Mary had a rightful place in the line of succession. The conflict divided the kingdom. Some supported Henry, others supported Catherine. Friends became enemies. Families were forced to choose sides. The religious world of England was transformed as monasteries were closed, wealth was taken by the crown, and the power of the old church system collapsed. Henry VIII had created a new religious order, but his motivation was not only faith, it was also control. The king now had authority over both the government and the church. In 1533, Henry secretly married Anne Boleyn after his marriage to Catherine was declared invalid by English authorities. Anne became queen. For a moment, she had achieved the impossible. The woman who once stood outside the royal circle now sat on the throne of England. But becoming queen was easier than staying queen. The Tudor court was a dangerous place. Success created enemies, and Anne had many. Some hated her because they believed she had destroyed Catherine's marriage. Others feared her influence over the king. Even Henry began to change. The passion that had once driven him started to disappear. Anne's greatest responsibility was to give Henry a son. The future of the Tudor dynasty depended on it. In 1533, Anne gave birth to a child, a daughter, Elizabeth. The baby would later become one of England's greatest monarchs, but at that moment Henry was disappointed. He wanted a male heir. The pressure on Anne increased. She became pregnant again, but tragedy followed. The child was lost. Henry's frustration grew. The king who had broken with Rome for Anne now began looking for a way to remove her. The woman who had once been his greatest desire became his greatest problem. Rumors began spreading. Anne was accused of having relationships with other men at court. The charges were shocking. The Queen of England was accused of betrayal against the king. The evidence was controversial, and many historians have debated it for centuries. Some believe Anne was truly guilty. Others believe the accusations were created to destroy her. But in Tudor England, truth was often less powerful than the king's will. A group of men were arrested and accused of being Anne's lovers. One of them was a musician named Mark Smeaton, who confessed under pressure. Another was George Boleyn, Anne's own brother. The accusations became more extreme. The queen was accused of committing adultery and plotting against the king. The punishment for such crimes was death. The woman who had changed England now stood alone. Anne Boleyn was arrested and imprisoned in the Tower of London. The Tower had a terrifying reputation. Many prisoners entered through its gates and never left alive. For Anne, the place that represented royal power became her final prison. While she waited for her fate, Henry had already moved on emotionally. Another woman was waiting. Jane Seymour. Unlike Anne, Jane was quiet, gentle, and appeared less threatening. Henry saw in her the possibility of a new beginning. The trial of Anne Boleyn was a political performance. The outcome was almost certain before it began. She was found guilty. Her marriage to Henry was declared invalid. Her crown was taken away. Her enemies had won. On May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn walked to her execution. But even at the end, she showed the confidence that had defined her life. She did not beg for mercy. She did not curse the king. She prepared herself for death. The execution ended the life of one of the most famous women in Tudor history. But it did not end her influence. Because the daughter she left behind would one day change England forever, Elizabeth. The child who was once considered a disappointment would become the ruler who created England's golden age. The tragedy of Anne Boleyn became one of history's greatest ironies. Her marriage failed, her life ended, but her bloodline survived. The Tudor throne continued, and the darkest chapters were still ahead. After the execution of Anne Boleyn, England entered another chapter of uncertainty. Henry VIII had removed the woman who changed the course of history, but the question that had driven him for years remained the same. Who would inherit the Tudor throne? The king needed a son. The future of the dynasty depended on it. Only a short time after Anne's death, Henry married Jane Seymour. Jane was very different from Anne. She was not known for sharp political battles or dramatic ambition. She presented herself as calm, obedient, and traditional. To many people at court, Jane seemed like the perfect queen, but her position was built on the tragedy of another woman. She became queen because Anne Boleyn was gone. Jane understood the greatest duty expected of her: produce a male heir. The pressure was enormous. Every day of her marriage carried the weight of the entire kingdom's future. Then in 1537, the moment Henry had dreamed of finally happened. Jane gave birth to a son, Edward. For the first time, Henry VIII had a legitimate male heir. The king was filled with joy. Celebrations spread across England. The child who could continue the Tudor dynasty had arrived, but the victory came with a terrible cost. Jane Seymour suffered complications after childbirth. Her health collapsed. Only days after giving Henry the son he wanted, Jane died. Henry had lost another wife, but unlike Anne Boleyn, Jane was remembered with respect. She was the only one of Henry's wives to be buried beside him after his death. Her role in history was complicated. She gave Henry the heir he desired, but she paid the highest price. Henry's search for stability continued. He was a king who wanted control over everything: his kingdom, his church, his family, and even the future. But control was never guaranteed. Edward VI became king after Henry VIII died in 1547. He was only 9 years old. A child now sat on one of the most powerful thrones in Europe. Because Edward was too young to rule alone, powerful advisors controlled the government. England entered a new period of religious transformation. The Protestant reforms that began under Henry VIII became stronger under Edward. Church traditions changed. Images were removed. Religious practices were rewritten. For some people, this was progress. For others, it was destruction. England was becoming a battlefield of beliefs. But Edward's reign would not last long. The young king was intelligent and educated, but his health was fragile. By his teenage years, it became clear that he was seriously ill. The future of England became uncertain again. If Edward died without an heir, who would rule? The answer was complicated. Henry VIII had created a succession plan, but religion and politics made everything dangerous. Edward wanted to keep England Protestant. He feared that if his Catholic sister Mary became queen, the religious changes would be reversed. So before his death, Edward attempted to change the succession. He named Lady Jane Grey as his successor. Jane Grey was young, educated, and from a powerful family, but she never truly had the support needed to rule. When Edward died in 1553, Jane became queen. Her reign lasted only 9 days. Because Mary Tudor, Henry VIII's daughter with Catherine of Aragon, had strong support, the people recognized her claim. Mary marched toward power. Jane's supporters collapsed. The young queen was removed. Mary became the first woman to rule England as queen in her own right. But Mary's rise came with its own tragedy. She had spent years watching her mother being rejected, her own legitimacy questioned, and her place in the royal family attacked. She carried deep anger and resentment. Mary wanted to restore Catholicism. She believed England had turned away from the true faith. Her reign became one of religious conflict. Those who opposed her religious policies were punished. Hundreds of Protestants were executed for heresy. This earned Mary the nickname Bloody Mary. But history is more complicated than a single name. Mary was not simply cruel. She believed she was protecting her country and her religion. The problem was that her methods created fear and division. The Tudor age was full of people who believed they were doing what was necessary, yet their actions left behind suffering. Mary's personal life also became a struggle. She wanted a marriage that would strengthen England and create an heir. She chose Philip of Spain. But many English people feared foreign influence. They worried England would lose its independence. Mary faced rebellion, political opposition, and disappointment. Her greatest desire remained the same as her father's, a child to continue the dynasty. But history repeated itself. Mary never produced an heir. Her health declined, and when she died in 1558, the Tudor throne passed to the daughter of Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth. The child who was once considered illegitimate became queen. The daughter of a woman executed by her own father's command now ruled England. A new Tudor chapter was beginning, and this time the queen would not be a wife. She would be the ruler. When Elizabeth I became queen in 1558, England was a nation full of uncertainty. She inherited a kingdom divided by religion, weakened by political struggles, and surrounded by enemies. Her father, Henry VIII, had changed England forever. Her mother, Anne Boleyn, had been executed. Her brother Edward died young. Her sister Mary had ruled through religious conflict. Now Elizabeth had to survive in the most dangerous position of all, the throne of England. A woman ruling alone was almost unimaginable in the 16th century. Many people believed a kingdom needed a king. A queen was expected to marry and produce children and allow a husband to guide political decisions. But Elizabeth had different plans. She understood that marriage could be a source of power, but also a source of weakness. If she married a foreign prince, England could lose control. If she married a powerful English nobleman, he might try to rule through her. So Elizabeth chose a path no monarch before her had successfully taken. She became the Virgin Queen. Her unmarried status became a symbol of strength. She presented herself as married to her kingdom. But behind this image was a complicated reality. Elizabeth was not without emotions. She had close relationships with powerful men, and rumors followed her throughout her reign. One of the most famous men connected to Elizabeth was Robert Dudley. Dudley was handsome, ambitious, and one of the Queen's closest companions. Many at court believed there was a deep personal connection between them. Their relationship created endless gossip. Some believed Elizabeth truly loved him. Others believed she used their relationship as a political tool. The mystery has remained for centuries. Elizabeth understood something important. In politics, perception was power. A queen's image could protect her, and Elizabeth became a master of controlling her image. She appeared in portraits as a symbol of beauty, wisdom, and eternal youth. Her clothing became part of her political message. Her famous speeches created the image of a ruler who was deeply connected to her people. But behind the elegant image was a ruler constantly fighting for survival. Elizabeth faced threats from inside and outside England. Religious division remained one of her greatest challenges. Catholics considered her illegitimate because her father's marriage to Anne Boleyn had been rejected by many. Some Catholic powers wanted Mary, Queen of Scots, to replace her. Mary was beautiful, royal, and had a strong claim to the English throne. She became one of Elizabeth's greatest threats. Mary's life was filled with drama. She was Queen of Scotland, connected to European royal families, and involved in political struggles. Eventually, she was forced to flee Scotland and seek protection in England. But Elizabeth faced a difficult decision. Should she help another queen, or should she see Mary as a danger? Elizabeth kept Mary imprisoned for years. The two queens never met. Their relationship became one of the most fascinating rivalries in history. Mary's supporters became involved in plots against Elizabeth. The most famous was the Babington Plot. The plan was to remove Elizabeth and place Mary on the English throne. When the plot was discovered, Elizabeth faced an impossible choice. Mary was a fellow queen, but she was also accused of threatening Elizabeth's life. In 1587, Mary, Queen of Scots, was executed. The death of Mary shocked Europe. Elizabeth had removed her greatest royal rival, but it came with the consequences. England's enemies saw it as a major insult. The most powerful threat came from Spain. King Philip II of Spain had once been married to Elizabeth's sister Mary. After Mary's death, tensions between England and Spain grew. Spain was a global superpower. England was still trying to establish itself. Then came one of the most famous conflicts in naval history, the Spanish Armada. In 1588, Spain sent a massive fleet to invade England. The goal was to overthrow Elizabeth and restore Catholic rule. England appeared to be facing impossible odds, but the English Navy used faster ships, better tactics, and knowledge of their waters. The Armada suffered a devastating defeat. The victory became a defining moment of Elizabeth's reign. England was no longer a weak kingdom. It had become a rising world power. The Elizabethan age became known as a golden era. Art, literature, exploration, and culture flourished. Theater became extremely popular. This was the age of great writers, including William Shakespeare. English explorers traveled across the world. The nation began expanding its influence. But the Golden Age had a darker side. Elizabeth's reign was not peaceful for everyone. Religious persecution continued. Political enemies were watched by spies. Secret networks protected the Queen from assassination attempts. One of the most important figures in Elizabeth's intelligence system was Francis Walsingham. He created a powerful spy network that uncovered threats before they could succeed. The Tudor world had become a place of hidden messages, secret meetings, and political deception. Everyone watched everyone. Trust was rare. Survival depended on information. As Elizabeth grew older, the biggest question returned: who would inherit the throne? Unlike her father, Elizabeth never produced an heir. The Tudor dynasty that began with Henry VII was approaching its end. The queen who refused to marry had protected her power, but she left England with an uncertain future. After more than a century of ambition, love, betrayal, and bloodshed, the Tudor story was reaching its final chapter. Elizabeth I died in 1603. With her death, the Tudor dynasty ended, but its legacy survived. The Tudors transformed England. They destroyed old traditions, created new political systems, changed religion, and built the foundation of a modern nation. Their story remains unforgettable Because it was never just about kings and queens, it was about human ambition, love, fear, power, and the price of wearing a crown. The Tudor dynasty began with a battlefield victory, and it ended with a queen who left behind a powerful but uncertain kingdom. For more than 100 years, the Tudors changed England forever. They rose from the chaos of civil war. They survived betrayal, rebellion, religious conflict, and endless struggles for power. But every dynasty has an ending. And the final years of Tudor rule revealed the same truth that had followed the family from the beginning. Power never lasts forever. When Elizabeth I died in 1603, England entered a new chapter. The woman who had ruled for 45 years left no child behind. The Tudor bloodline had reached its end. The throne passed to James VI and I, who was already King of Scotland. A new royal house began. The House of Stuart replaced the Tudors, but the shadow of the Tudors remained. Their story was filled with contradictions. They created stability, but through violence. They promoted national strength, but often through fear. They spoke of love, but many of their marriages ended in tragedy. The most famous example was Henry VIII. Henry wanted love. He wanted a son. He wanted control. But his search for these things destroyed lives. Catherine of Aragon spent years fighting to protect her marriage and her daughter's future. Anne Boleyn reached the highest position in England and then lost everything. Jane Seymour gave Henry his son, but lost her own life. Anne of Cleves survived by being clever enough to avoid becoming an enemy. Catherine Howard, young and trapped in a dangerous court, lost her life after accusations of betrayal. Catherine Parr, the final wife of Henry VIII, survived by understanding the king's changing moods and protecting herself. The wives of Henry VIII became symbols of Tudor tragedy. Their stories showed that being close to power could be more dangerous than being far away from it. But the Tudor drama did not end with Henry. His children carried the weight of his decisions. Edward VI inherited a kingdom he was too young to control. His short reign showed how fragile the throne could be. Mary I spent her life trying to restore the world she believed had been destroyed. Her actions made her one of the most controversial monarchs in English history. Elizabeth I transformed England into a stronger international power. Yet even she could not solve the biggest Tudor problem: succession. The Tudors were obsessed with the future. Every ruler feared what would happen after their death. That fear shaped their decisions. It created marriages. It created wars. It created executions. The Tudor era was not only a story of kings and queens, it was also a story of ordinary people living through extraordinary change. Religious reforms changed how people worshipped. Political conflicts changed how people understood loyalty. The growth of printing spread new ideas across society. England was becoming a different nation. The old medieval world was disappearing. A new modern world was beginning. The Tudors also changed England's relationship with the wider world. During Elizabeth's reign, English exploration expanded. Sailors crossed oceans, trade networks grew. England began looking beyond Europe. The foundation of future global power was being created. But this expansion also brought conflict and competition. The Tudor Age was a time of opportunity and danger, a time when ambition could create greatness, but also destruction. The mysteries surrounding the Tudors still attract people today. Was Anne Boleyn truly guilty? Did Elizabeth I secretly love anyone? How much of Tudor history was truth, and how much was political propaganda? The answers are not always simple. History is often written by those who survive. The Tudors understood this better than anyone. They carefully created images of themselves. They used paintings, speeches, ceremonies, and symbols to shape how people remembered them. A king could appear powerful. A queen could appear eternal. A dynasty could appear unstoppable. But behind the images were real people. People who feared death. People who wanted love. People who wanted to be remembered. That is why the Tudor era remains so fascinating. It was not only a story of palaces and crowns. It was a story of human nature. The desire for power. The fear of losing everything. The search for love. The betrayal of friends. The cost of ambition. The Tudor dynasty ended, but its influence continued. Modern Britain was shaped by decisions made during these turbulent years. The English monarchy, religion, politics, and national identity all carry the marks of the Tudor age. A family that began as outsiders became rulers of a kingdom. A king who wanted an heir changed an entire nation. A daughter who was once rejected became one of England's greatest queens. The Tudors proved one unforgettable lesson. A throne may be made of gold, but the path to it is often covered in blood. The Tudor dynasty has survived for centuries in the memories of people because it was never a simple story of kings and queens. It was a world where every smile could hide a secret. Every friendship could become a threat. Every marriage could become a political weapon. The Tudor court was a place where love and danger existed together. Behind the grand celebrations, expensive clothing, and royal ceremonies was a world of fear. A world where one wrong word could destroy a person's life. One of the greatest mysteries of the Tudor era was the truth behind the accusations that destroyed Anne Boleyn. Anne's fall remains one of history's biggest debates. She was accused of adultery, betrayal, and even plotting against Henry VIII. The charges were shocking. A queen was not simply accused of personal failure. She was accused of threatening the entire kingdom. But historians have questioned whether the evidence was real or whether Anne became the victim of a political plan. Henry VIII had already changed England for Anne. He broke away from the authority of the Pope. He created a new church. He transformed the nation. But when Anne failed to provide the son he wanted, the same king who had fought for her turned against her. The story revealed something terrifying about Tudor power. The king's love could disappear as quickly as it appeared. Another mystery surrounded the fate of Henry VIII's two missing nephews, the sons of his sister Margaret Tudor's line, and other royal claims that influenced succession struggles. The Tudor period was filled with questions about who truly had the strongest right to rule. Bloodline alone was never enough. Power belonged to whoever could control the crown. The Tudors also created a world of secret diplomacy. Spies became essential. A letter could start a war. A hidden message could save a life. Elizabeth I especially understood the importance of information. Her enemies were everywhere. Plots were constantly forming. The fear of assassination was real. One of the most dangerous threats came from religious conflict. England was caught between Catholic and Protestant powers. For many people, religion was not just a belief. It was a matter of life and death. The Tudor rulers changed the official religion several times. Under Henry VIII, England separated from Rome. Under Edward VI, Protestant reforms expanded. Under Mary I, Catholic traditions returned. Under Elizabeth I, a compromise was created. But every change created enemies. People were punished for refusing to follow the ruler's religious direction. The Tudor throne was not only political, it controlled people's daily lives. The darkest moments of the era came from the idea that disagreement could be treated as betrayal. Executions became a tool of power. The Tower of London became a symbol of fear. Many famous figures entered through its gates. Some walked out, others never did. But the Tower was not only a prison, it was also a place where the Tudor monarchy displayed its strength. The message was clear. No one was above the crown. Not nobles, not politicians, not even queens. Another fascinating part of Tudor history was the secret world of royal relationships. Elizabeth I never married, but rumors followed her throughout her life. Her connection with Robert Dudley became one of history's greatest unanswered questions. Their relationship was close, but Elizabeth always protected her independence. She understood that marriage could limit her authority. By remaining unmarried, she became a symbol of national unity. Her enemies mocked her choice. Her supporters turned it into a legend. The Virgin Queen became one of the most powerful images in English history. But the Tudor obsession with image went beyond Elizabeth. Every monarch understood the importance of reputation. Kings and queens were not only rulers, they were performers. They needed people to believe in their greatness. Portraits were carefully designed. Clothing carried messages. Public ceremonies displayed power. The Tudors understood something modern leaders still understand. The way people see power can be almost as important as power itself. The Tudor era also contained hidden stories of ordinary people. Not everyone lived in castles. Most people were farmers, workers, soldiers, and merchants. They experienced the changes of the Tudor period in very real ways. Religious changes affected their communities. Wars affected their families. Taxes affected their survival. The decisions made inside royal palaces reached every corner of the kingdom. The Tudors shaped England from the top down, and ordinary people carried the consequences. The end of the Tudor dynasty did not erase these mysteries. Instead, it made them stronger. The unanswered questions remained. Who was truly loyal? Who was secretly ambitious? Who was telling the truth? Who was rewriting history? The Tudor age continues to fascinate because it shows the most human side of power. A crown does not remove fear. A palace does not remove loneliness. A throne does not guarantee happiness. The Tudors had everything people dream of: wealth, influence, and authority. Yet their lives were filled with betrayal, insecurity, and tragedy. The dynasty that changed England was also a dynasty haunted by its own success. The Tudor obsession with succession was one of the greatest forces that shaped the entire era. For the Tudors, the future was everything. A ruler without an heir created uncertainty. A weak line of succession invited rebellion. A missing child could become the center of a national crisis. The crown was never just a crown. It represented the survival of an entire dynasty. This fear began with Henry VII. He had won the throne through battle, but he knew his claim was not completely secure. Many still questioned whether a man who took power by force could truly be accepted as the rightful king. So Henry VII spent much of his reign protecting his position. He watched nobles carefully. He punished possible rivals. He built a government based on control. The king who ended the Wars of the Roses wanted to make sure England would never fall into another civil war. But the same fear that built the Tudor dynasty would later create some of its greatest tragedies. Henry VIII inherited his father's desire for security. But unlike Henry VII, he wanted something more. He wanted a son who would carry the Tudor name into the future. The absence of a male heir became an obsession. This obsession changed the course of history. Catherine of Aragon gave Henry a daughter, Mary, but Henry wanted a boy. His desperation led him to break with the Catholic Church and create a new religious system. Few personal desires in history have had such enormous consequences. A king's private problem became a national revolution. The birth of Edward VI seemed to solve everything. Finally, the Tudor line had a male heir. But Edward's young age created another crisis. A child king meant powerful adults would compete for influence. The people around the throne became just as important as the person wearing the crown. This was the danger of royal succession. A young ruler could become a symbol for others to use. Edward's death proved how fragile the system was. The attempt to place Lady Jane Grey on the throne showed the desperation of those who wanted to control England's future. Jane was intelligent and well-educated, but she was placed into a situation where the crown became a trap. Her 9-day reign ended with her imprisonment. She became another victim of Tudor ambition. Mary I's rise was a personal victory. For years she had watched her mother, Catherine, lose her position. She had been separated from her father. She had been declared illegitimate. Becoming queen was the moment when she finally regained the power she believed was hers. But Mary's reign showed the danger of trying to reverse history. She wanted to restore the old religious order. She wanted to return England to Catholicism. But the country had already changed. Her actions created resistance. The same crown that gave her power also isolated her. Mary's greatest tragedy was not only political, it was personal. She desperately wanted a child. A pregnancy would have secured the future. It would have proven that the Tudor dynasty could continue. But it never happened. The throne passed to Elizabeth. Elizabeth's approach to succession was completely different. She understood that marriage created risk. A husband could become a rival. A foreign marriage could bring foreign control. So she turned her unmarried status into a political weapon. But the decision created another problem. Who would come after her? Throughout Elizabeth's reign, people constantly questioned the future. The queen avoided naming an heir because succession could become dangerous. A named successor could become a focus for opposition. People might begin supporting the next ruler while Elizabeth was still alive. For Elizabeth, silence was a way of maintaining control. But history eventually made the decision for her. When Elizabeth died, the Tudor dynasty ended. The crown passed to the Scottish royal line. The family that had transformed England disappeared, but their bloodline continued through descendants. The Tudor story also contained many hidden scandals. Royal courts were filled with rumors, affairs, secret marriages, and questionable claims surrounded the monarchy. Some people claimed to be lost heirs. Others claimed royal connections. In a world where blood determined power, pretending to have royal blood could be extremely valuable. The Tudors knew this. That is why they were so careful about controlling information. A rumor could become a rebellion. A secret could become a weapon. The Tudor era teaches a powerful lesson about history. The official story is not always the complete story. Kings wrote laws. Queens shaped images. Victors recorded events. But behind every decision were personal fears, ambitions, and emotions. The Tudor rulers were not mythical figures. They were human beings placed in impossible positions. They loved. They feared. They made mistakes. They searched for security in a world where nothing was guaranteed. And perhaps that is why the Tudor story remains unforgettable. Because beneath the crowns and castles was something everyone understands. The struggle to protect what matters most. The Tudor court was a world where ambition could create greatness, but it could also destroy everything a person had built. Behind the walls of royal palaces, every friendship had a purpose. Every alliance had a price. Every promise could be broken. The people closest to the monarch were often the ones facing the greatest danger. Because in Tudor England, being near the throne meant being near power, and power always attracted enemies. One of the clearest examples was the rise and fall of Thomas Wolsey. Wolsey began as a man from a modest background, but through intelligence and political skill, he became one of the most powerful figures in England. He served Henry VIII as a chief advisor and controlled many aspects of government. For years, Wolsey seemed untouchable. He lived with enormous wealth. Foreign rulers respected him. The English court revolved around his decisions. But Wolsey made one fatal mistake. He failed to give Henry what the king wanted most: a divorce from Catherine of Aragon. Henry's anger destroyed Wolsey's position. The man who once controlled England lost everything. He died before facing a trial for treason. His fall showed a brutal truth of Tudor politics. The king's favor was temporary. Another powerful figure who learned this lesson was Thomas Cromwell. Cromwell was one of the architects of Henry VIII's transformation of England. He helped organize the break with Rome. He helped strengthen royal control. He helped dissolve the monasteries and increase the king's power. For a time, Cromwell seemed almost as powerful as the king himself. But power created jealousy. His enemies waited. When Henry's marriage to Anne of Cleves failed, Cromwell became the target. The king blamed him for the political disaster. The same ruler Cromwell had served so successfully turned against him. In 1540, Thomas Cromwell was executed. His death became another reminder that in Tudor England, loyalty did not guarantee survival. The Tudors also faced constant rebellion. Not everyone accepted royal decisions. Religious changes created anger. Economic pressures created frustration. Many people believed the monarchy had gone too far. One of the major uprisings during Henry VIII's reign was the Pilgrimage of Grace. Thousands of people in northern England protested against the dissolution of monasteries and religious changes. They claimed they were defending their faith and traditions. The rebellion frightened Henry. But instead of compromise, the crown responded with force. The leaders were executed. The message was clear. The Tudor government would not tolerate challenges. During Elizabeth I's reign, rebellion became even more complicated. The Queen faced threats from both foreign enemies and domestic conspirators. The world around her became a battlefield of spies, secret letters, hidden messages, double agents. Elizabeth's government depended heavily on intelligence. The famous spy network helped uncover plots before they succeeded. One of the most dangerous threats came from Catholic conspirators who wanted to replace Elizabeth. The Queen's enemies believed that removing her would change England's future. The struggle was not only political, it was deeply connected to religion. Many Catholics saw Elizabeth as an illegitimate ruler. Many Protestants saw her as the protector of their faith. The English throne became the center of a religious conflict that affected the entire nation. But the Tudor story was not only about kings and ministers. It was also about women who survived in a world designed to limit their power. Women like Catherine Parr showed incredible intelligence. As Henry VIII's final wife, Catherine managed to survive the dangers that destroyed others. She was educated, politically aware, and deeply involved in religious discussions. Unlike some of Henry's earlier wives, Catherine understood how to navigate his changing emotions. She became a stepmother figure to Henry's children. She helped restore the royal family connection between Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward. Her influence shaped the future of England. The children of Henry VIII would become the rulers who defined the later Tudor age. But Catherine's survival was remarkable because Henry's court was unforgiving. A queen could be celebrated one day and condemned the next. The Tudors also created some of the most dramatic stories of betrayal in history. Friends betrayed friends. Families turned against each other. Nobles abandoned old loyalties. The reason was simple. Everyone understood that the crown controlled everything. A person who stood against the king could lose their title, their wealth, and their life. The Tudor era was a time when reputation could matter more than truth. Accusations could become reality if enough powerful people supported them. The difference between hero and traitor was often decided by who won the political battle. That is why the Tudor period remains mysterious. The questions never disappear. Who was innocent? Who was guilty? Who was a victim? Who was simply playing the dangerous game of survival? The Tudors created a powerful nation. But they did it through fear, control, and constant struggle. Their world was beautiful on the outside, but underneath the gold and jewels was a dangerous reality. The closer someone stood to the throne, the closer they stood to destruction. The Tudor dynasty did not become powerful through peace alone. From the beginning, England's survival depended on battles, diplomacy, and the ability to defeat enemies who wanted to control the future of the kingdom. The Tudor rulers understood one thing clearly. A weak England would be controlled by stronger nations. During the Tudor era, Europe was a battlefield of competing powers. France, Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, and England all fought for influence. Every marriage, every alliance, and every war could change the balance of power. Henry VII began the Tudor story by securing his throne after civil war, but he knew that military victory alone was not enough. He needed diplomacy. He arranged marriages. He created alliances. He used negotiation as a weapon. His son, Henry VIII, took a very different approach. Henry wanted England to be respected as a major European power. He wanted glory. He wanted victories. The young king dreamed of becoming a legendary warrior. At first, many believed he could achieve it. Henry VIII was athletic, educated, and confident. He wanted to stand beside the greatest rulers of Europe. One of his biggest rivals was France. For centuries, England and France had competed for influence. Henry launched campaigns against France, hoping to gain territory and prestige. But war was expensive. Victories were often temporary. The reality of being a king was more complicated than the dream. The Tudor monarchs had to balance ambition with survival. The greatest foreign threat during the Tudor period eventually came from Spain. Spain was one of the most powerful empires in the world. It controlled enormous wealth from overseas territories. Its navy was considered almost unstoppable. For many years, England and Spain had been connected. Mary I married Philip of Spain, hoping to strengthen relations. But after Mary's death and Elizabeth's rise, the relationship collapsed. Elizabeth supported Protestant movements abroad. Spain saw this as a threat. Religious conflict became international politics. King Philip II of Spain believed England was challenging his authority. The tension between the two nations continued to grow. The Spanish Armada became the dramatic climax of this conflict. In 1588, Spain prepared one of the largest naval invasions Europe had ever seen. The goal was to remove Elizabeth I and restore Catholic control in England. The Armada was enormous. Many believed England had little chance. Spain had experienced commanders. It had powerful ships. It had a reputation built over decades. England's situation looked desperate, but the English response showed the importance of strategy. The English Navy used smaller, faster ships. They attacked from a distance. They avoided fighting the Spanish in the way Spain expected. The English also benefited from the weather. Storms damaged the Spanish fleet as it attempted to return home. The defeat of the Armada became a turning point. England survived, but more than survival happened. England's confidence grew. The victory became a symbol of national strength. The idea of England as a rising world power became stronger. However, the story of Tudor expansion was not only about battles. It was also about exploration. English sailors crossed unknown seas. They searched for new trade routes. They competed with Spain and Portugal. The ocean became the next battlefield. Explorers brought back stories of distant lands, new resources, and opportunities. The Tudor period helped begin England's transformation into a global power. But expansion also created conflict. Competition for trade and territory became intense. The same ambition that built England's influence also created future struggles. Elizabeth's reign also saw the growth of English privateers. These sailors attacked enemy ships and weakened rival powers. Figures such as Francis Drake became famous. They were seen by some as heroes and by others as pirates. This showed another reality of the Tudor age. The line between exploration, trade, and warfare was often unclear. A sailor could be celebrated at home while feared abroad. The Tudor government used these actions to challenge stronger enemies. But the cost of power was always high. Wars required money. Money required taxes. Taxes created anger. The crown had to constantly balance military ambition with the needs of the people. The Tudor rulers also faced threats from within. Foreign enemies often supported internal rebellions. Religious conflicts created opportunities for opponents to challenge the monarchy. The throne was never completely safe. Elizabeth's government relied heavily on intelligence and preparation. The defeat of the Armada was not just a naval victory. It was the result of years of political strategy, diplomacy, and information gathering. The Tudor age changed England's position in the world. Before the Tudors, England was often a secondary power compared with larger European nations. After Elizabeth's reign, England had become more confident and more ambitious. The foundations of future global influence had been created. But the Tudor success came with a hidden cost. The same rulers who built national power also created divisions. The religious conflicts of the Tudor era would continue long after the dynasty ended. The political struggles would shape future governments. The questions of royal authority and the rights of rulers and subjects would become even more important. The Tudors won battles. They survived enemies. They built a stronger England. But their greatest battle was always the same: how to hold power in a world where everyone wanted it. The Tudor dynasty lasted only a little over a century, but its influence reached far beyond its short existence. The Tudors did not simply rule England. They transformed it. They changed religion. They changed politics. They changed the idea of monarchy. They changed the relationship between the crown and the people. Their story was filled with triumph and tragedy, but their impact shaped the future of the nation. The Tudor legacy begins with Henry VII. Before him, England had been weakened by years of civil war. The Wars of the Roses had destroyed noble families and created uncertainty about who had the right to rule. Henry VII's victory at Bosworth ended that period. But his greatest achievement was not winning. The England he left behind was very different from the one he inherited. But the most famous Tudor transformation came from his son, Henry VIII. Henry VIII's reign changed the course of English history. His desire for a male heir led to a conflict with the Catholic Church. That conflict created the Church of England. The decision was not only religious, it was political. The king placed himself at the center of English religious life. This changed the balance of power forever. For centuries, the Church had been connected to European authority. Henry's actions made England more independent. But the transformation came with enormous consequences. Monasteries were closed. Religious traditions were destroyed. People who resisted the changes faced punishment. The break with Rome created a new England, but it also created deep divisions. The religious struggles continued through the reigns of Edward VI, Mary I, and Elizabeth I. Each ruler had a different vision for England. Edward pushed Protestant reforms. Mary attempted to restore Catholic traditions. Elizabeth created a compromise that shaped English identity for generations. The Tudor period showed that religion was not just a personal belief. It was connected to power, politics, and national identity. Perhaps the greatest symbol of Tudor transformation was Elizabeth I. Her reign became known as a golden age. But the image of Elizabeth as a perfect ruler hides the challenges she faced. She inherited a divided kingdom. She faced powerful enemies. She survived assassination plots. She had to prove that a woman could rule successfully in a world dominated by men. Elizabeth turned her image into a weapon. She created the idea of the Virgin Queen. She presented herself as a ruler whose life belonged to her country. Her unmarried status became a symbol of independence. Through speeches, portraits, and public appearances, Elizabeth created one of the strongest royal images in history. But the Tudor legacy was not only about rulers, it also changed culture. The Tudor era was a time of artistic and intellectual growth. Literature expanded. Theater became a major part of society. The English language developed new influence. The period produced some of the greatest writers and thinkers in English history. The Renaissance reached England during the Tudor Age. New ideas spread. Education expanded. People began questioning old traditions. England was becoming a modern state. The Tudors also changed England's relationship with the wider world. During Elizabeth's reign, English sailors explored oceans and challenged larger empires. England began competing internationally. Trade expanded. Naval power increased. The foundations of future British influence were created. However, the Tudor legacy also contains darker chapters. The dynasty was built on executions, political manipulation, and religious conflict. Thousands suffered because of decisions made at the highest levels of power. The Tudors showed how dangerous absolute authority could become. A king's personal desire could reshape an entire nation. A queen's survival could determine the future of millions. The Tudor story is also a story about memory. Each ruler tried to control how history would remember them. Henry VIII wanted to be remembered as a powerful king. Elizabeth wanted to be remembered as the protector of England. Their images were carefully created. But behind those images were complicated human beings. They were ambitious. They were fearful. They were sometimes cruel. They were sometimes brilliant. That complexity is why the Tudor era remains fascinating. It is not a simple story of heroes and villains. It is a story of people struggling with power. The end of the Tudor dynasty came with Elizabeth's death in 1603. The crown passed to a new royal family. The Tudor name disappeared from the throne, but their influence continued. The modern idea of England was partly created during their rule. The monarchy became more centralized. The nation became more independent. The world began to see England differently. The Tudors proved that a small dynasty could change history. They began as a family fighting for survival. They ended as the creators of a new England. Their story remains one of the greatest examples of how personal choices can change the destiny of an entire nation. The Tudor era was filled with love, betrayal, ambition, and blood. But above all, it was a story about power. The power to create, the power to destroy, and the power to be remembered. After the Tudor dynasty ended, the official story of their reign became clearer. but not necessarily more truthful. Because history is never just what happened. It is also what survived. And in the Tudor case, what survived was carefully shaped by power, survival, and political necessity. The Tudors left behind not only a dynasty, but a collection of mysteries that still challenge historians today. One of the biggest questions is simple, but never fully answered. How much of Tudor history is truth, and how much is carefully constructed image? Take Henry VIII as an example. To some, he is remembered as a powerful king who transformed England. To others, he is remembered as a ruler driven by desire, insecurity, and obsession with control. But both versions exist at the same time. The reality is more complex than either story alone. Henry's decisions were not made in isolation. They were shaped by politics, fear of instability, pressure from Europe, and the constant need for a male heir. Even his famous break with Rome was not only about Anne Boleyn, it was also about authority. Control over religion meant control over the entire nation. But the official Tudor narrative often simplified these events into a single cause. That simplification became part of the legend. Anne Boleyn remains one of the greatest mysteries of the Tudor world. Was she truly guilty of the crime she was accused of? Or was she the victim of political removal once she failed to meet the king's expectations? No final answer exists. The evidence is incomplete, and much of it may have been shaped by those who wanted her removed. Her story became a symbol of how quickly favor could turn into downfall. Another mystery surrounds Elizabeth I and her personal relationships. Was she truly devoted only to her role as queen, or did she suppress personal desires for political survival? Her connection with Robert Dudley continues to be debated. Some letters and accounts suggest deep emotional attachment. Others suggest careful political theater. Elizabeth herself ensured that no clear answer would survive. That uncertainty became part of her power. Then there is the mystery of succession itself. Why did Elizabeth refuse to name an heir for so long? Was it pure political strategy, or fear of losing control? Or something deeper, a belief that naming a successor could destabilize her reign? Even today, historians disagree. The Tudor court was also full of hidden networks that remain partially invisible in history. Spies operated in silence. Letters were coded. Messages were hidden in everyday communication. Much of this world was deliberately designed to disappear after use. That means modern understanding of Tudor espionage is always incomplete. We know it existed. We know it was powerful. But we do not know everything it uncovered. One of the most fascinating parts of Tudor history is how carefully image was controlled. Portraits were not just art. They were political statements. Clothing, posture, and symbols all carried meaning. Elizabeth I, in particular, mastered the system. She created an image of eternal authority. In portraits, she appeared almost timeless. This was not accident. It was strategy. Even after death, Tudor rulers continued shaping their legacy. Writers, historians, and political figures who came after them interpreted events in ways that reflected their own time. The Tudor story was retold again and again. Each retelling added new meaning. Some rulers were portrayed as heroes, others as villains, but the truth remained layered beneath interpretation. There are also mysteries. surrounding lesser-known figures of the Tudor world. Nobles who rose quickly and disappeared just as fast. Courtiers whose loyalty changed without explanation. Individuals who were present in key events, but left almost no record. Their silence creates gaps in the historical record, and those gaps become space for speculation. Another hidden aspect of Tudor history is the everyday life of ordinary people. Their voices are often missing from official records. We know what kings did, we know what queens decided, but we know far less about how those decisions felt on the ground. How did ordinary families experience religious change? How did villages respond to royal laws? How did fear and loyalty shape daily life? These questions remain partly unanswered, because history often preserves power more than experience. The Tudor era also raises a deeper question. Was the dynasty truly unique, or is it remembered as more dramatic because of surviving records? Many dynasties in history experienced similar struggles, but the Tudors left behind unusually strong documentation, stories, and symbolism. That made their history easier to preserve and easier to mythologize. The result is a dynasty that feels larger than life, a family that seems almost legendary. But behind the legend were real people facing real consequences, fear of execution, pressure to produce heirs, struggles for survival in a world without security. The Tudors were powerful but not invincible. They were shaped by their time as much as they shaped it. The hidden truth of Tudor history is not a single secret waiting to be revealed. It is a collection of uncertainties, questions without final answers, stories that depend on perspective, and interpretations that change with time. That is why the Tudor era continues to attract attention. It is not just history, it is mystery. And in many ways, the mystery is the legacy itself. Because even after centuries, the Tudors are still not fully known, and perhaps they never will be. The Tudor story is not only about a dynasty that ruled England, it is about the nature of power itself. Because when you look closely at the Tudor world, the crowns and castles begin to fade, and what remains is something far more human. Fear, ambition, love, and the constant struggle to control an uncertain future. The Tudors lived in a time when survival was never guaranteed. A king could be overthrown, a queen could be executed. A noble could rise or fall in a single moment, depending on favor, rumor, or politics. Nothing was stable. Everything was temporary. This instability shaped every decision they made. Henry VII built his reign on control because he had seen what chaos could do. Henry VIII broke away from centuries of religious authority because personal desire and political necessity became impossible to separate. Elizabeth I refused marriage because she understood that even love could become a form of political weakness. Each of them chose survival in different ways, but all of them paid a price for power. The Tudor era shows that history is never clean. It is not a straight line of victories or defeats. It is a series of choices made under pressure, uncertainty, and fear. When we remember Henry VIII, we often remember the 6 wives. But behind that memory is a deeper truth. A ruler trapped between desire for control and fear of collapse. When we remember Anne Boleyn, we remember ambition and downfall. But behind that memory is a system where political survival mattered more than personal truth. When we remember Elizabeth I, we remember strength and independence. But behind that memory is a lifetime of isolation, responsibility, and constant danger. The Tudors did not live simple lives. They lived lives where every decision could change a kingdom. And that weight shaped everything. The legacy they left behind is also complex. They transformed England into a centralized nation-state. They changed religion in ways that still echo today. They strengthened monarchy while also exposing its vulnerability. They helped build England's global future while living in a world still filled with instability. But perhaps the most important legacy is not political at all. It is psychological. The Tudor era teaches us how power changes people. It reveals how fear can influence even the strongest rulers. It shows how ambition can build greatness, but also destroy it. And it reminds us that history is not created by perfect figures. It is created by flawed human beings trying to survive extraordinary circumstances. There is also a deeper contradiction at the heart of the Tudor story. They wanted stability, but created change. They wanted control, but lived in uncertainty. They wanted legacy, but built it through chaos. This contradiction is what makes them unforgettable. Because it reflects something universal, the same tension exists in every age, between what people want and what reality allows. Between power and vulnerability, between truth and perception. In the Tudor world, these tensions were simply more visible. The throne made them impossible to hide. When Elizabeth I died, the Tudor dynasty ended quietly in form but not in influence. A new royal house took the crown, but the ideas the Tudors shaped remained. The concept of monarchy had changed. The relationship between ruler and nation had changed. England itself had changed. And yet the Tudors did not disappear from memory. They became something else, a story, a symbol, a warning, and a fascination that continues long after their time ended. Because the Tudor era is not remembered only for what happened. It is remembered for what it represents: the cost of ambition, the fragility of power, the danger of desire, and the human struggle behind every crown ever worn. In the end, the Tudors remind us of a simple truth. History is not made by the powerful alone. It is made by the choices they are forced to make, and the consequences those choices leave behind. That is why their story still matters. Not because they were perfect, but because they were not. And because in their rise and fall, we see something timeless, ourselves. When the Tudor dynasty ended, it did not feel like a dramatic collapse. There was no final battle that erased their name, no single moment that marked the end of everything they built. Instead, it ended quietly, with the death of Elizabeth I in 1603. A long reign came to rest. A bloodline that had reshaped England simply stopped producing rulers. And just like that, the Tudor chapter closed. But the world they created did not close with it. It expanded, it evolved, and it continued shaping everything that came after. The first thing the Tudors left behind was a stronger monarchy. Before them, England's crown had often been unstable, challenged, and divided. After them, the monarchy became more centralized and more defined. The idea of a sovereign ruler with absolute authority had been tested and proven both powerful and dangerous. No future monarch could ignore that lesson. The second legacy was religious transformation. The break from Rome under Henry VIII permanently changed England's identity. Even after decades of conflict between Catholic and Protestant rulers, one truth remained. England would never return to being the same kind of Catholic nation it once was. Faith and politics had become permanently intertwined. The third legacy was national identity. By the end of Elizabeth's reign, England was no longer just a European kingdom. It was beginning to see itself as something separate, stronger, more independent, more ambitious. The defeat of the Spanish Armada had become a symbol of survival against overwhelming odds. That memory shaped how England saw itself for centuries. But the Tudor legacy was not only political or religious. It was also cultural. The Elizabethan age gave rise to a new artistic world. The stage became a place where human emotion was explored in depth. Language evolved rapidly. Stories became more complex. And the English voice began to carry global influence. At the center of this cultural transformation stood figures like William Shakespeare, whose works captured the emotional intensity of the age. Through drama and poetry, the spirit of the Tudor world was preserved, not in laws or battles, but in language itself. Another major legacy was the growth of intelligence and statecraft. Under Elizabeth I, the use of espionage and political surveillance became a defining feature of governance. The network built by figures such as Francis Walsingham showed that power in the Tudor world was not only about armies. It was about information. Knowledge became a weapon. Secrecy became strategy. And this new form of politics influenced generations of rulers after them. Yet alongside these achievements, the Tudor legacy carries a darker weight. It is impossible to separate their accomplishments from the cost at which they came. Executions, religious persecution, political fear, broken families, lives shaped and often destroyed by decisions made at the center of power. The Tower of London still stands as a reminder of that cost, a place where ambition and fear met face to face. Perhaps the most important legacy of all is psychological. The Tudors changed how people understood authority. They demonstrated that kings and queens were not distant, untouchable figures. They were human beings capable of fear, passion, and error. That realization slowly changed how people thought about governance. It planted early seeds of political awareness that would grow in later centuries. Even after the Tudors disappeared, their influence remained embedded in institutions, traditions, and national memory. Their story became more than history. It became narrative. It became identity. It became legend. And legends, unlike simple facts, never truly end. They are retold, reinterpreted, reimagined. The Tudors are remembered not because they were flawless, but because they were deeply human under extreme pressure. They lived at the intersection of ambition and insecurity, of love and survival, of belief and power. And in that intersection, they created a world that still fascinates us today. Because the Tudor story is not locked in the past, it continues to echo in every discussion of power, leadership, and legacy. The rise and fall of the Tudors is ultimately a reflection of a timeless truth. Every era believes it controls its destiny. But history is always shaped by choices no one fully understands at the time they are made. And long after the crowns are gone, the consequences remain. Long after the Tudor dynasty ended, what remained most clearly was not just the politics or the wars, it was the human cost. Because every major decision made during the Tudor era, every marriage, execution, rebellion, and reform, ultimately landed on ordinary people. Not just on kings and queens, not just on nobles, but on families who lived far away from the royal court. In villages and towns across England, people felt the impact of decisions they did not choose. When religion changed under Henry VIII, it was not an abstract shift in doctrine for most people. It meant the removal of familiar traditions. It meant uncertainty about what was right and what was forbidden. It meant fear, because what was acceptable yesterday could become dangerous tomorrow. When monasteries were closed, they were not just buildings lost to history. They were centers of charity, food, and community support. Their disappearance changed daily life for thousands. The Tudor crown grew stronger, but many local structures grew weaker. Under Edward VI, religious reforms continued rapidly. For some, it felt like progress. For others, it felt like cultural loss. Then, under Mary I, the reversal of religion brought another wave of confusion and punishment. Faith became a cycle of shifting authority. People were asked again and again to adapt, to obey, to change what they believed. For ordinary families, survival often depended on silence. During Elizabeth I's reign, relative stability returned, but uncertainty never fully disappeared. Laws still controlled belief. Spies still watched for dissent. And loyalty to the crown remained essential for safety. But the Tudor era was not only defined by suffering, it was also a period of adaptation. People learned how to navigate uncertainty. They learned how to survive changing systems of power. They learned that identity could no longer be fixed in one form for too long. That flexibility became part of English society. The Tudor period also reshaped ideas about justice. Punishments were severe by modern standards. Executions were public. Fear was used as a tool of governance. But at the same time, the concept of law and authority became more centralized and structured. Power was becoming more organized. Even cruelty had a system behind it. This paradox defines much of the Tudor world. Order built through instability, strength built through fear, unity built through division. At the top of this system stood individuals like Henry VIII, whose personal desires could reshape national policy. His search for a male heir did not remain a private concern. It became the foundation of religious revolution. It became the reason institutions collapsed and rebuilt themselves. Few rulers in history have had such direct impact on the structure of a nation based on personal need. Yet Henry himself was not untouched by consequence. He became increasingly isolated over time, surrounded by advisors yet never fully secure, respected but feared, powerful but never at peace. Anne Boleyn's story reflects another side of Tudor reality. She rose through intelligence and determination. She became queen. She helped transform England. And yet her position remained fragile from the beginning. Her downfall revealed how quickly favor could become accusation, how easily narrative could replace truth, and how political necessity could overwrite personal reality. Elizabeth I inherited all of this history. She understood it deeply. Her entire reign can be seen as an attempt to stabilize a system that had spent decades in constant motion. She chose caution over impulse, control over emotion, image over exposure. And in doing so, she created one of the most stable periods in Tudor history. But even her stability was not without cost. She remained isolated at the center of power, surrounded by advisors, yet ultimately alone in decision-making. Her refusal to marry preserved her authority, but also preserved her solitude. This is one of the most consistent patterns of the Tudor story. Power rarely came without isolation. The crown demanded sacrifice from everyone who wore it, and from those closest to it. As the Tudor era moved toward its end, one truth became increasingly clear. The dynasty was not just a sequence of rulers. It was a system of pressure, a system where every role was defined by expectation, fear, and survival. Kings and queens were not simply individuals. They were vessels of continuity. And when continuity failed, the entire system shifted. That is why the transition to the Stuart dynasty did not feel like a break in history. It felt like continuation with new faces. The structure remained. The consequences remained. The memory of the Tudors remained. Even today, the Tudor world continues to attract attention because it feels intensely human despite its distance in time. It is not only about what they did, it is about what they endured and what they represented. The struggle between desire and duty, between individuality and expectation, between power and cost. In that struggle, the Tudor era becomes more than history. It becomes a mirror, reflecting not only a past age, but a recurring pattern in human leadership itself. Even after the Tudor line ended, its shadow did not disappear from England. It lingered in politics, in religion, and in the collective memory of the nation. Because the Tudors had not only ruled a kingdom, they had rewritten what it meant to rule at all. When James VI of Scotland became James I of England, he inherited more than a throne. He inherited a system shaped by fear, ambition, and reform. A system built during one of the most unstable centuries in English history. The Tudor legacy immediately placed expectations on the new monarchy. Strength was required. Control was expected. Unity was demanded. But the foundation beneath the crown was still shaped by Tudor decisions. The Church of England remained in place. Religious tension still existed beneath the surface, and political authority was still deeply tied to the monarch's identity. The Tudors had centralized power so effectively that future kings could not easily separate themselves from it. But beyond institutions, the Tudor name lived on in memory, not as a simple record of rulers, but as a story filled with emotion. Henry VIII remained one of the most remembered kings in European history, not because of stability, but because of transformation. His reign is remembered as a turning point where personal desire and political power became inseparable. A king who changed religion for a marriage, a ruler whose search for control reshaped an entire nation. Anne Boleyn remained equally unforgettable. not as a queen who ruled long, but as a figure whose rise and fall became symbolic. Ambition, romance, danger, and sudden collapse. Her story became a warning about the fragility of favor in royal courts. Elizabeth I, in contrast, became a symbol of endurance. Her long reign created a sense of continuity after decades of instability. She became associated with strength, intelligence, and restraint. A ruler who survived where others fell. But even her legacy carries complexity. Behind the image of the Virgin Queen was a lifetime of political calculation. Every decision shaped by awareness that one mistake could destabilize everything. Together, these figures form the emotional core of the Tudor legacy. But the dynasty is not only remembered through rulers, it is also remembered through transformation. The Tudor era marked a shift from medieval governance toward early modern statehood. Power became more centralized. Institutions became more structured. National identity became more defined. England began to see itself not just as a kingdom, but as a nation with a distinct path. The consequences of Tudor rule extended far beyond their own century. Religious division did not disappear. It evolved. Political authority continued to develop along lines shaped by Tudor reforms, and the monarchy itself remained influenced by the balance of power they created between crown and state. Yet perhaps the most lasting impact of the Tudors is not structural. It is narrative. The Tudor era became one of the most retold periods in English history, because it contains everything history often seeks. Conflict, transformation, personalities, and consequence. It is a story where individuals matter deeply, but where no one escapes the weight of the system they inhabit. Even today, the Tudor world is revisited again and again in literature, film, and historical study. Not because it is distant, but because it feels familiar in its emotional structure. Ambition leading to conflict, power creating isolation, love becoming political, and truth becoming uncertain. The Tudors remind us that history is not a straight path. It is a series of turning points shaped by human decisions under pressure. And those decisions do not vanish when the people are gone. They remain embedded in the world they helped create. That is why the Tudor story continues to matter, not because it belongs to the past, but because it reveals patterns that still exist in the present. Leadership, legitimacy, fear, legacy, and the price of holding power too tightly for too long. In the end, the Tudors did not simply rule England. They changed it. And in changing it, they ensured that their story would never truly end. Because the echoes of their choices are still felt in the world that followed. And that is the final truth of the Tudor era. Dynasties end, but their consequences do not. The Tudor dynasty ended in 1603, but its story did not remain locked in that year. It continued to grow, not in reality, but in memory. Because after a dynasty disappears from the throne, it begins a second life in history. And the Tudors entered that second life more powerfully than almost any other royal family in England. Over time, their story stopped being only about political events. It became something larger, a cultural symbol of power, danger, and transformation. The reigns of Henry VIII and Elizabeth I, in particular, became defining reference points for how monarchy itself is understood. Henry VIII's legacy became inseparable from the idea of absolute royal authority, a king who could reshape religion, a ruler whose personal decisions could become national law. Even centuries later, his name remains associated with control and conflict between church and state. But historical memory simplified him. It focused on drama, on marriages, on executions, on rebellion. And in that simplification, the human complexity behind his decisions often becomes secondary. Elizabeth I, on the other hand, became something close to a national icon. Her reign is remembered as a golden age, a period of cultural growth, political stability, and rising international confidence. But her legacy also depends on careful balance. She ruled in a world still recovering from decades of instability. Her image as the Virgin Queen became central to her political identity, a symbol of independence, a symbol of national unity, and a symbol of control over personal narrative. Together, Henry and Elizabeth became the two pillars of Tudor memory, one representing transformation through force, the other representing stability through control. But the Tudor afterlife is not only shaped by rulers, it is shaped by storytelling. Writers, historians, and later generations reinterpreted the Tudor period according to their own times. Each era emphasized different aspects. Some focused on romance and tragedy, others on political genius, others on cruelty and oppression. The Tudors became flexible symbols, able to represent different meanings depending on who was telling the story. This adaptability is one reason their legacy has lasted so long. The Tudor court, once a center of immediate political survival, became a stage for historical imagination. Anne Boleyn became a figure of ambition and downfall. Catherine of Aragon became a symbol of loyalty and endurance. Mary I became a complex representation of faith and persecution. And Elizabeth I became an almost mythic ruler, balancing power and identity. These interpretations are not fixed truths. They are layers added over time. Another part of the Tudor afterlife exists in national identity. Modern England still carries traces of Tudor transformation. The structure of the monarchy, the role of the Church of England, and the development of parliamentary authority all contain echoes of decisions made during the Tudor period. Even cultural memory, festivals, literature, historical education, continues to revisit this era more than most others. Because the Tudors represent a turning point, a moment when medieval traditions gave way to early modern structures. But the Tudor legacy is not purely positive or negative. It is mixed, powerful, and complicated. They created stability after chaos, but often through methods that generated fear. They strengthened national identity, but at the cost of internal division. They expanded influence, but through conflict and uncertainty. This duality is essential to understanding why their story continues to be retold. The Tudor era does not offer simple lessons. It offers tension. And that tension is what keeps it alive in historical imagination. Even in modern interpretations, the Tudors are often presented in ways that reflect contemporary concerns, questions about leadership, questions about gender and power, questions about authority and legitimacy. The Tudor story adapts because it contains all of these themes naturally. It is not frozen in time. It evolves with each generation that revisits it. And perhaps that is the final stage of any great historical legacy, when the facts remain, but the meaning continues to change. The Tudors no longer exist as rulers, but they exist as symbols. And symbols are more enduring than crowns, because crowns belong to a time, but symbols belong to memory, and memory does not obey borders of time in the same way. The Tudor dynasty, therefore, is no longer just history. It is interpretation, a mirror that reflects both the past it came from and the present that remembers it. By the time the Tudor dynasty reached its end, nothing about it felt simple anymore. What began as a fight for a crown had become something far larger, a transformation of a nation's identity, faith, and political structure. But every transformation carries a final cost, and for the Tudors that cost was permanence. Because they changed England so deeply that even their disappearance could not undo what they had built. When Elizabeth I died in 1603, there was no dramatic collapse of the state, no sudden breakdown of order. Instead, there was transition, a passing of authority to the Stuart line. But beneath that transition, the Tudor system still remained. The monarchy was stronger than before. The state was more centralized. Religion was still tied to politics. And national identity was more defined than it had ever been. The Tudors had achieved something rare in history. They ended their own dynasty, but not their influence. The final paradox of the Tudor story is this. They created stability through instability. They created order through conflict. And they created identity through division. That contradiction never fully disappears. Even after their reign, England continued to wrestle with the structures they left behind. Monarchs who followed inherited both strength and limitation. Parliamentary growth, religious tension, and political debate all carried traces of Tudor decisions. But beyond institutions, something more emotional remained. The Tudor era became a permanent part of cultural memory, not just as history, but as narrative identity, a story people return to because it feels complete in structure, but unresolved in meaning. Henry VIII remains a figure of contradiction, a king who expanded royal authority while destabilizing personal relationships, a ruler who reshaped religion while struggling with private insecurity. Anne Boleyn remains a symbol of ambition and vulnerability. Her rise and fall still represent the fragile boundary between influence and destruction. Elizabeth I remains a symbol of controlled power, a ruler who built stability through restraint and identity through image. These figures continue to exist not because they are fully understood, but because they are endlessly reinterpreted. And in that reinterpretation, the Tudor world continues to live. The deeper meaning of the Tudor era is not found in its events alone. It is found in its structure, a system where power depended on perception, where legitimacy depended on survival, where truth often depended on who remained in control long enough to write it. That structure is what gives the Tudor story its lasting weight, because it reveals something universal about political life, that authority is never only about force. It is about belief, and belief can change faster than any law or army. The Tudors understood this instinctively. That is why they invested so heavily in image, symbolism, and narrative. They did not just rule England. They shaped how their rule would be remembered, and in doing so, they extended their influence beyond their own existence. Even today, the Tudor era is used to explain broader themes: how nations form, how power consolidates, how religion interacts with authority, and how personal decisions can become historical turning points. But the final truth of the Tudor story is simpler than all of that. It is not only about kings and queens, it is about limits. The limit of power, the limit of control, the limit of certainty in a world driven by change. The Tudors tried to master those limits. Sometimes they succeeded. Often they did not, but in trying they reshaped everything around them. And that is why their story remains alive. Not because it ended dramatically, but because it never fully ends in meaning. It continues wherever power, identity, and survival are questioned. The Tudors are gone. But the questions they left behind are still here. And as long as those questions remain, the Tudor story continues. After everything, the wars, the reforms, the executions, the crowns gained and lost, the Tudor era does not end in silence. It ends in echo, because the impact of the Tudors did not stay confined to their century. It spread outward, shaping the centuries that followed in ways both visible and invisible. The most immediate echo was political. The Tudor monarchy had transformed the crown into a centralized authority with far greater reach than before. Future rulers could not return to the older, weaker model of fragmented control. England had changed too much. Power had become institutional, not just personal. The second echo was religious. The Church of England, created out of conflict and necessity, remained a defining structure long after Henry VIII's decision. Even when beliefs shifted, the framework remained. Faith and state had become permanently linked in a way that reshaped national identity. But the most powerful echo of the Tudors was psychological. They changed how people understood authority itself. Before them, monarchy could feel distant, almost absolute in a traditional sense. After them, monarchy felt more human, but also more dangerous. Because the Tudor era revealed something uncomfortable, that rulers are shaped by emotion as much as by law, desire, fear, ambition, insecurity. These were not separate from power. They were part of it. And that realization never fully left English political thought. Over time, the Tudor story also became a foundation for cultural identity. Not because it was peaceful, but because it was dramatic. It contained conflict that felt meaningful. It contained individuals whose choices seemed to change history instantly. It contained stories that could be retold endlessly without losing intensity. This is why the Tudor era became such a dominant historical narrative. It is not only remembered, it is performed, rewritten, reimagined. Each generation finds something new in it. Victorian writers emphasized morality and tragedy. Modern interpretations often focus on psychology and political strategy. Popular culture highlights romance, betrayal, and spectacle. But beneath all interpretations, the structure remains the same. A dynasty rises from instability. It consolidates power. It transforms a nation. And it ends without direct collapse. leaving behind a stronger system and unresolved tension. That structure is what gives the Tudor story its lasting resonance, because it mirrors a pattern found throughout history. Change that is achieved through conflict and stability that is never fully stable. Even the figures of the Tudor world continue to evolve in meaning. Henry VIII is no longer just a king with 6 wives. He is a study in authority and contradiction. Anne Boleyn is no longer just a fallen queen. She is a symbol of ambition and vulnerability. Elizabeth I is no longer just a ruler. She is a symbol of political endurance and controlled identity. These transformations in interpretation are part of the Tudor legacy itself, because they show how history is never static. It is always being rebuilt in the present. The final echo of the Tudor era is found in that process, in the fact that the story continues even when the dynasty does not. The Tudors built institutions that outlived them. They created narratives that outlived them, and they shaped questions that still remain unanswered. What is the price of power? Can authority exist without personal sacrifice? Is stability ever permanent? The Tudor world does not provide final answers. It only provides examples. And those examples remain powerful because they are human, flawed, intense, real in consequence, even when uncertain in detail. In the end, the Tudor era is not just a period of English history. It is a lens, a way of understanding how power works when placed under extreme pressure, and why it always leaves behind more than it takes. The dynasty ended, but the reflection did not, and that reflection is what keeps the Tudor story alive, not as a memory of what once was, but as a reminder of what power always becomes. By the time we reach the final layer of the Tudor story, something becomes clear. The Tudors were never just a dynasty. They were a turning point, a bridge between 2 worlds, medieval tradition and early modern reality. And that is why their story feels larger than it should, because it is not only about what they did, but about what they changed. The final truth of the Tudor era is that it was built on constant instability disguised as control. Every Tudor ruler tried to create order in a world that resisted it. Henry VII used calculation to stabilize a broken kingdom. Henry VIII used force to reshape religion and authority. Edward VI inherited a system too fragile to sustain him. Mary I tried to reverse change that had already become irreversible. Elizabeth I built stability not by removing tension, but by managing it carefully. None of them fully solved the problem of power. They only managed it for a time. That is the deeper structure behind the Tudor story. Power in the Tudor world was not permanent. It had to be maintained constantly, and maintenance required sacrifice. This is why the Tudor court feels so intense in historical memory. Because every position, no matter how high, was unstable. Favor could shift. Loyalty could collapse. Accusation could replace truth overnight. Even the idea of legitimacy was fragile. Bloodline mattered, but so did perception. Law mattered, but so did influence. Religion mattered, but so did political necessity. Everything existed in balance, and everything could tip. That instability created both greatness and tragedy. It allowed rapid transformation. But it also created constant fear. The Tudor legacy is therefore not simply a story of success or failure. It is a story of tension between tradition and change, between authority and insecurity, between image and reality. And that tension is what gives the Tudor era its lasting power in memory, because it reflects a truth that extends beyond history. The stability is never guaranteed, and power is never fully secure. Even the most iconic figures of the era exist within this tension. Henry VIII is remembered for strength, but also for instability in personal and political life. Anne Boleyn is remembered for rise and fall, but also for the fragility of favor. Elizabeth I is remembered for control, but also for the constant pressure of succession and survival. These are not separate stories. They are variations of the same pattern, a system where human emotion and political structure are inseparable. The Tudor era also reveals how history itself is constructed. What survives is not always what is most accurate. It is what is most recorded, most repeated, most useful to later generations. That is why the Tudors became so prominent in historical memory. They left behind a strong narrative framework. Drama, conflict, transformation, clear personalities, and decisive turning points. But behind that clarity is uncertainty. Many details remain debated. Many motivations remain unclear. Many interpretations remain contested. And that uncertainty is part of the truth, because the Tudor world was never fully transparent, even in its own time. It was layered, political, symbolic, strategic, and emotional. So when we try to understand it now, we are not just studying history. We are interpreting construction. The final truth of the Tudor era is therefore not a conclusion. It is an awareness that history is never fixed, that power is never simple, and that even the most famous stories are only partial reflections of what actually happened. The Tudors remain powerful in memory because they sit at the intersection of clarity and mystery. We know enough to understand their importance, but not enough to fully resolve their complexity, and that gap is where interpretation lives. In the end, the Tudor story does not close. It dissolves into meaning, and that meaning continues to shift with every generation that revisits it. Because the Tudors are not only remembered for what they were, they are remembered for what they reveal about power, about people, and about the fragile balance that holds both together. Every long story eventually reaches a point where events stop unfolding, but meaning continues. The Tudor era is one of those stories, because what ended in 1603 was not just a royal line. It was a chapter of transformation that permanently altered England's direction. But even end is not the right word, because the Tudor legacy did not stop. It simply changed form. The crown passed to the Stuarts, but they inherited a kingdom already reshaped by Tudor decisions. The monarchy was stronger than it had ever been. Religion was permanently altered. Government was more centralized, and England's identity was no longer the same as it had been before the Tudors. So in a way, the Tudors did not disappear. They dissolved into the structure of what came next. That is why their story feels unfinished, even when it is complete. Because they are present in the consequences, not just in the memory. When we step back from the individual rulers, Henry, Mary, Edward, Elizabeth, the pattern becomes clearer. The Tudor era was not defined by one person. It was defined by pressure. Pressure to secure succession. Pressure to control religion. Pressure to maintain authority in a world that was constantly shifting. Every Tudor monarch lived inside that pressure in a different way. Henry VII contained it. Henry VIII expanded it. Edward VI inherited it too early to control it. Mary I fought against it. Elizabeth I managed it until the very end, but none of them removed it completely. That pressure is the invisible force behind the entire era, and it is what gives the Tudor story its intensity, because underneath every decision was uncertainty. Underneath every crown was instability. Underneath every victory was the fear of collapse. And yet from that instability, something lasting merged, a stronger state, a more defined monarchy, a clearer sense of nationhood, and a cultural memory that still dominates how this period is understood. The Tudor legacy is therefore not just political or religious, it is structural. It changed the framework of power itself in England. But the most lasting part of the Tudor story is not structure. It is reflection. Because the Tudors continue to be retold, not as distant rulers, but as symbols of human struggle under extreme conditions. They represent ambition pushed to its limits, authority tested beyond certainty, identity shaped under pressure, and consequence that extends beyond intention. That is why their story survives so strongly in modern imagination, not because it is perfect history, but because it is relatable in its emotional logic. People still recognize the patterns, desire leading to conflict, power creating isolation, and change producing both progress and loss. The Tudor world feels distant in time, but familiar in structure. And that is the final reason it endures, because it reflects something timeless about human systems of power. In the end, the Tudor era is not a closed book. It is a continuing interpretation, a story that has already happened, but is still being understood. And perhaps that is the true ending. Not silence, but continuation in memory. Not disappearance, but transformation into meaning. The Tudors are gone, but the world they helped shape is still here. And as long as that world continues to be studied, questioned, and reinterpreted, their story will continue too. Not as rulers of England, but as one of history's clearest examples of how power changes everything it touches.